Hello, everyone. My name is Halila Kelsboy. I am a crazy believer in change and an optimistic believer in the innate capacity of human beings to change the world for the better when capacitated correctly. And at times, much to Samir's delight, I sing. I am a performance director and a dance choreographer. And today I have done you a huge service. I have taken time to note down my notes so that I don't go off on wild tangents. So please have fun watching me read my beautifully outlined notes. And forgive me if I look down ever so often. So very quickly, I'm very determined that we have an engaged panel this evening. Some of you might wonder how. It is an incredible method that I'm going to use. For example, I am going to say good evening, and you are going to say, let's try that again. Good evening, and you are going to say,
good evening.
Oh, we're almost there. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Wonderful. And I will also teach you Swahili. So back home in Tanzania, when you want to welcome somebody, you say karibu. And the person to say thank you says asante. Asante. So we're going to try this. Welcome to the panel, karibu. And you say?
Asante.
Karibu.
Asante.
There we go. So now you know Swahili. Welcome to Tanzania. Splendid. So a round of applause for all the audience. That's where you clap for yourselves. Fantastic. So just to quickly introduce your moderator for today, me. I run Unleashed Africa Social Ventures, a Tanzanian-based social enterprise that operates brands working in the areas of art development, responsible events and communications, sustainable public health, gender, and social enterprise ecosystem development. So we work with a deep focus on innovation, youth engagement, and youth capacity building for African development. And currently, we have picked up a huge and deep interest in tech and the digital economy, seeing that this is where the jobs of the future are going to be homed. So enough about me. I want to open up this conversation by sharing a shocking number from an unofficial report I heard last year. So unofficial, one of Africa's leading development organizations mentioned in a conference that I was attending that Africa loses $500 million a year for not creating an enabling environment for women to flourish in economic development activities. $500 million. Chump change, huh? Very little money. So with that, I would love to bring, by the way, I was being sarcastic, just in case, okay. So with that, I would love to bring up our esteemed panel of conversation stirrers today. And because this is what I would like us to have in this session, a conversation, one that will in one way or the other lead to key action points that we might all be able to reflect and act upon as we deep dive into the digital revolution. So to the panel, we have a hot topic this evening, gender and the gig economy. Ding, 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 right? I did say I was in performance, so, yeah. So as we drive into a full swing economy, we now have the potential to alter the paradigms in which women engage and prosper. As workplace cultures blur, we have the potential to define a new status quo and a unique chance in time to shift how gender is perceived in economy and society as a whole. But as always, potential does not equal capacity, neither does it guarantee change. So here is the format for our discussion. I will give you a chance to introduce yourselves and the wonderful work that you do, and to reflect upon and maybe enlighten us on the pre-existing biases that exist and threaten to be replicated in the digital space should we stand still and watch. I will go across the stage from my far right and let you introduce yourselves and maybe take 5 minutes all the way. Then we'll come to Regina, Catalina, we're Madhu, and then we're going to finish with you, Rajeev, because as the only male on the stage, I think you have a lot to answer for. I was still being sarcastic. No. So,
no pressure.
So to the audience, this is what I ask of you. I ask for your eyes, I ask for your ears, and I ask for your hearts this evening. Let's fully engage. I know you might be hungry, but we are about to sculpture a fantastic future for the digital economy, and we happen to all be part of it right now, in this moment. So let's make it count. Regina, karibu.
Thank you very much. My name is Regina, and I originally come from Hungary, but I promise you that I'm not going to make you speak Hungarian, because that would definitely ruin all the fun in this room. I currently live in Berlin and have spent the past 10 years supporting young social entrepreneurs who use technology to create an impact in their communities' lives. I did that at the ITU, which is a UN agency for telecommunications. Most of you must know it. And the Ashoka Foundation. And I started my own company, a small NGO, about 2 years ago. And last year, I started writing my PhD on social innovation in critical technical practice at the Technical University in Berlin. In my free time, I'm also a fellow at the Center for Internet and Human Rights at the Viadrina University. I don't have any free time. And I brought a paper with me today that is actually going to be released by the Center for Internet and Human Rights this week. Just brought a couple of key points for you from this paper. I mentioned all this background about myself so that you understand that I'm coming from more of a sociological, societal, and academic background when I answer questions about gender and the gig economy. So the paper is titled "The App as a Boss, Control and Autonomy in App-Based Management." Of course, talking about the gig economy and the digital economy, what kind of autonomy do you have over your own work? And if an algorithm is your boss, does that algorithm have any accountability? What are the biases that have been built into? So my colleagues have been researching a food delivery platform in Berlin for the past year or so, I believe, interviewing workers who are working in this gig-based economy for the company. They did not include any key findings on gender, but they did share them with me. Riding bicycles and making sure that the food gets there wherever it's supposed to be is, as I was told, a macho job by design. You have to be fit, fast, competitive, and flexible, which makes perfect sense. And that means that only about 20 to 30% of the riders are actually women. My colleagues have actually not found any algorithmic bias. They said that the algorithm, as a boss in this case, has been fair to women, and the decision-making about who gets to deliver the food is fair. However, there has been one very big challenge that I would definitely like to maybe further also discuss tonight, and that is that the phone numbers of these female riders are available for the restaurant personnel, and there have actually been quite a few harassment cases. So women have been called on their phones, with questions that had actually nothing to do with their work. So this digital, but also physical safety is missing in some cases. And of course, we all know that in the gig economy, there is no unions because you're not actually working for a company per se, you're not employed. The very interesting thing about this in Berlin is that as there is no protection of workers, people have been underpaid and exploited. There have been some organizing of collective action. And even though the riders are actually, the minority of the riders are women, the organizers the majority of the organizers were women. So congrats to us.
Catalina.
Hello. Well, first of all, I am so glad to be here. I've been in almost all of the editions of CyFy, and I have seen it grown, and thank you so much again for the invitation. My name is Catalina Ruiz Navarro. I am a Colombian journalist and feminist living in Mexico City, and I am the editor-in-chief of Volcanica magazine, which is a regional feminist magazine in Spanish for young Latin American millennial women. One of the main things that we were trying to fix in the media with this magazine is that usually, if you have a feminist writing in a newspaper in Latin America, then you have one token feminist that she should talk about every gender issue. But what we're trying to do is to get 30, 25 different feminists that come from different backgrounds and do not have representation in the media. We have 2 transgender women as columnists, we have 5 indigenous women, we have 3 Afro-Caribbean women writing, and this may come as a shock, but I've only seen, I think, we are the media in Latin America with more black women having a voice and writing in the whole region. We have feminists that are talking about motherhood, we have domestic workers, we have a sex worker that has a column and it's advocating for sex workers' rights. So it's pretty much trying to find all of these topics and arguments of contemporary feminism. I mean, having a discussion, a regional discussion in Spanish, because one of the main problems we actually have is that being a region that mostly speaks in Spanish, we don't get a lot of the topics of discussion that are already very ahead in English. For example, we couldn't read Rebecca Solnit's Mansplain Things to Me until never, because I think it hasn't yet been translated to Spanish. So we don't even have the word mansplaining in Spanish. So you would just get very angry when somebody mansplained you, but you could not have a word to tell him, you are doing this, and this is structural, and it's connected to so many things. So what we're trying to do is put this discourses that are embodied in this woman on the table, and one of the things that we want is to make them experts, because usually the media doesn't call them and doesn't pay attention to them. If we get to talk about feminism in the media, it's usually cisgender women that look white, because in Latin America I am white, not here. So it's pretty much trying to see how we can open these spaces and how these voices can become experts, so they can actually have incidence in the way we think and the things we're talking about. And just a little bit, I would just want to say a quick anecdote about the gig economy and technology and women. When this began, when programming began to be a career, it was pitched to women, because it was supposed to be something like a secretary, but a little bit different and a little bit more demanding. And they said, we need people that are ordered, methodical, clean, fast. Like those were the jobs that women were doing. So at first, even at Cosmopolitan, they would advertise programming, the new job for women, it's perfect for you. It's like being a secretary, but with little ones and zeros. And suddenly, when it became profitable, and when the world realized that it was so profitable and so powerful to be programming and to be inhabiting a digital space, suddenly it became a career for men. And this is how power works. And one of the reasons why we are very worried about putting these bodies there is because at first I think we thought that cyberspace and the internet was a neutral space where our bodies didn't count. But then that was a lie. I am still a woman and a Latin American woman on the internet. So this is why every day I get called puta, or I get rape threats, or I get killing threats. It is because I cannot leave my body to go into the internet. And the privilege that I have outside of cyberspace are the privilege that I have inside of cyberspace. For example, being bilingual and speaking in English, this is huge. This means I have access to so many places and so much information in the internet that a lot of Latin American women don't. So just what I wanted to close with is that our bodies do not leave us when we go online. The problems, the biases, the prejudices, the inequalities that we have because of our gender outside of the internet are the same that we have inside and when we are working there. So instead of forgetting our bodies, I think we have to put them in the center of the problem and think about them and think which bodies are talking and speaking in the media, which bodies are being visible, and which ones are just being ignored.
Wow.
No.
Wow.
So Kalila mentioned while we were prepping that we should try and look at ourselves in the screens, so we have our best angle visible. My fairly modest bio is up on the screen, so I'm just going to move on to what the meat of my presentation here is going to be about, and which is mostly publicizing some of the results of the survey that my wonderful colleagues at ORF carried out, Terry and Vidisha. We'll be hearing more from them tomorrow as well. So to begin with, gig economy is not any homogeneous entity. It looks fairly different depending on where your starting point is. So especially in a country like India, you would imagine with the informal labor and the informal economy that we have and the amount of women in this informal economy, that some of the discrimination that exists offline would also percolate online. And these are the results of the survey as well. So the idea, one would imagine again that women prefer flexible hours and women prefer part-time work. There are studies showing that as well, that a natural correlation would be that gig economy would work for women. But the challenges and the discrimination that women face online are merely translated, are merely translated online with the gig economy. So the first point here is about the digital divide itself. So India has the largest number of phone users in the world. We have also the least expensive, the cheapest phones available anywhere in the world. But we also find that women do not have the same access that men have to phones. So it's about a 30% difference between men and women access to phones. So there's this narrative here in our country that we have to also challenge with the gig economy, is that when women have to access a household phone or a household computer, how do opportunities in the gig economy translate to a woman? So there have been studies to show that women aren't necessarily given access to the phone because they have their caregiver norms to live up to, for instance. So given this reality, I think we must consider whether the benefits of gig economy, let's say in part-time work, really again percolate to the Indian sector, seeing as again part-time is not necessarily an opportunity even if you are in this sector. And we have all been personally witness to it when we see overworked freelance, overworked independent contractors, or overworked people who work, let's say, driving some of these cars on these platforms. So moving on to the results of the survey itself, so we found that of the 37% women in the 5,000 people that were surveyed, that 30% of the women were not interested in joining the gig economy. So some of the reasons were, of course, that they didn't find that there was the same security that they wanted with offline jobs. They also found that that some of the same discrimination is found here as well. And I have a personal anecdote to add to this as well. So even in an email correspondence where I'm the one responding, I have found that men often respond to the men who's copied on the same email and not respond to me. Mm-hmm. So anyway, this just goes to the larger point that, just because it's tech or technology enabled, it's not that any of these instances do not find themselves even in this digital economy. So the other survey, I think in 2016, they found that there was about a 30% wage gap between women and men. And this was after when they shared the same number of years of experience. When it was 10 to 20 years of experience, women were still getting paid lesser than men. So I think we need to think about new ways of reimagining how we would evaluate work. So what are the measures or the metrics of how you would constitute what online work would look like? And then maybe reconfigure how this can or cannot work for women, and think about it differently. Not just about gig economy in general, but especially gig economy from emerging economies, which is different from what it looks like in the rest of the world.
Wow. There's so much I want to say to that, but let me just go straight to you because the time is moving fast.
Okay. Well, good evening. My name is Rajeev. I'm not an expert on gender, but I am a lifelong student of leadership. That's all I do. I study great leadership. And I'd like to start by an anecdote. When I'm doing my seminars and retreats on leadership, I like to ask this question. In August last year, Google fired an engineer named James Damore because he wrote a memo, which he said was well-researched, saying that women are inferior to men both in terms of technology and in leadership. And right after that memo went out, Google fired that CEO. So the question I usually ask is, was Google right in firing this guy? Now, I personally have absolutely no doubt that he should have been fired and the firing was right, but I am surprised that wherever I ask the question, public opinion is split bang in the middle, 50-50. If I were to ask you all, this room would be split 50-50. The ones who say, yes, it was right to fire him, say, of course, it's blasphemous, it's discriminatory, it's disrespectful to write such a memo even. How could you? And the other side says, well, all he was doing was expressing an opinion in a company that values freedom of speech. So how can you fire somebody just for expressing an opinion, right? Interesting, isn't it? Now, when you look up opinions on whether the gig economy is making the gender issues worse or better, again, I find a vertical split. There are both sides of the argument, those that are saying that, it is getting worse for women, and they are vociferous about defending their argument. And then there's the other half that says this has never been a better time for women than now, and they are equally vociferous about their opinion. So where do we go from there? So I'd like to use the remaining 4.5 minutes that I have instead to talk about what can we learn from the great many women that have actually overcome these challenges. Yes, the challenges are real. And sadly, those challenges are not going to go away anytime soon. I wish they would, but they're not. But what have the great women that have actually succeeded in overcoming those challenges, what can we learn from them? Let's look at one example. Edith Harbaugh. She is the founder of a startup that looks at software features and software coding platforms and raised $21 million recently in venture capital. Now, she struggled through several roles in different companies as an engineer, then failed at least 3 dot-coms, and was wondering what to do next. And then she takes a 3,300-mile cycling expedition that she claims changed her life. She says, most people give up within a few days of getting into the ride because they find out how difficult it is. But what I learned is, every time I feel like giving up, I need to remind myself what it would feel like when I cross the finish line. I learned that I must never lose sight of the bigger picture, and I must divide every day into small-time targets. So she would set her odometer to 0 every day and set herself a daily target of cycling for 60 miles a day before dinner. And she says, when I started Launch Darky, the platform that she launched, I used the same principles, and this time I succeeded. Now, I have studied many great leaders, women in particular, who have succeeded against the odds. And what I found was that these people, these women, these wonderful women, and men for that matter, they understand the word leadership differently from the rest of the world. In other words, they lead rather than live their lives. Let me explain. So, to most people, leadership is about authority, position, power, and the ability to use that power to influence other people, right? The moment somebody wins an election, we call them the leader of the country. The moment somebody is appointed the CEO, we call them the leader of the company. But is position power equal to leadership? Of course not. To yet other people, leadership is about skills and competencies. And a whopping $80 billion a year is spent around the world on teaching people on-the-surface skills like emotional intelligence, communication, and influencing in the name of leadership. But to real leaders like Edith Harbaugh, leadership is not a position or a title. Leadership is not about skills and competencies. Leadership is a burning desire, a deep in the gut desire to succeed in creating a better future against all odds. They want to either create something that doesn't yet exist to make the world better, or they want to improve something that exists, and they have an unlimited reservoir of unique strength within them which prevents them from giving up. Because the difference between a leader and a non-leader is just this. Non-leaders give up in the face of resistance. Anything you want to create that is different from today, you will meet with resistance, right? And the great women that have succeeded have utilized that inner strength in order to not give up in the face of that resistance. So my final point is this. Where does that long-lasting inner strength come from? I call that strength leadership energy. Why did Nelson Mandela not give up through 27 years of prison? Why did Edith Harbaugh not give up through 3,300 miles of her treacherous journey? Because they have great leadership energy. Where does that leadership energy come from? Two sources. One, you have to be super clear about a set of values that you will never compromise no matter what happens. And I'm not talking about a superficial understanding of your values, such a strong understanding that I will never compromise. Mandela said, I will forgive, even though his wife and daughter left him. The very people that he waited 27 years to meet, he says, no, my values are what they are. Second, you need to give yourself, through deep, honest reflection, a values-based purpose. Now, the moment the going gets tough, real leaders ask themselves the question. You know, they close their eyes and visualize their purpose, the better future they want to create, and say, why am I doing this? And imagine that it's already happened. That energizes them again. And if they are faced with a big crisis, they ask themselves a question, if I acted according to my values, what would I do? And the answer becomes very clear. So ladies and gentlemen, my plea here is, again, the challenges that women face are real, and they shouldn't have to face them. But unfortunately, the world is going to be the way it is, and these challenges are not going to go away anytime soon. Let's learn from these wonderful women. Let's learn how to find our own values and our own values-based purpose, because if we can, the only way you can fail is if you give up. And if you don't give up, you can never fail. So do you have a values-based purpose that keeps you from giving up from that resistance? Thank you.
There we go. You got me fired up. Trying to calm down, praise God. So, that's an incidence of a success story of a woman who is doing amazing things in the digital space. Madhulika, you spoke about the patriarchal social system that is actually transmitted from the physical into the digital space. You spoke about the fact that there's a status quo that is moving from one space to the other. But then my question would be, who is driving this change and who's driving the status quo? Should we then apply this leadership energy that you're speaking about to actually become and position ourselves as the drivers of change as we engage with the digital economy? Because then if we stand still and let the same status quo move into the digital space, then we're saying, it is up to them to do it. So what are we as women entrepreneurs and women in the digital space actually, how are we putting our foot down and saying, no, this cannot proceed, this needs to change? What are the ways that we can engage to actually have practical change in this space? So I want to give an opportunity to the audience to kind of now get into the conversation. There are 2 mics in the room. Wow. Oh, I thought you were standing. Okay. Right. Moving on. So there are 2 mics on either side of the room. Please feel free to stand up and position yourself to ask a question. Well, I have a bunch of questions that I'm going to ask to stir up the conversation further. But as you stand behind the mic, please note that you have about a minute to deliver your intervention, and I would appreciate if you would point out to whom you're addressing your question. Yes, so should we start with you?
Okay, my name is Max. I'm running a company with 500 employees, more than 260 of them women. So I'm a big advocate to empower women. But I guess what I wanted to share and also get your input on it, I see that so in general what we say in our company, women are by default smarter than men. And I know I get like a lot of boost usually from men by that. But what I mean by that is, in terms of work ethics, in terms of dependability, in terms of managing teams, we see that our women, like in the team, are much better like than men. But I think the one single thing that I usually try to give more to our female leadership team is to be more confident I think the only reason why out of our 500 people, the leadership team out of 30 is mainly men, is because just like they're more confident. They're not smarter. They're not doing a better job. They're just like they're taking more risks and they're willing to be wrong. And I was wondering, from like the whole panel, what can we do to empower women to be more confident, to take more risks, and also to take up on the leadership positions?
There we go.
Both. Go ahead.
Catalina, would you like to start? Then we'll, Regina, you could kind of.
So, go ahead. Okay. There's a saying that goes that we all wish to have the confidence of a mediocre white man. Yes. So that's the first thing. I mean, women have imposter syndrome because we have to prove our worth twice, and we are being questioned all of the time. Just make the exercise of listening to football narrators while you're watching a game, and really listen to the idiotic things they say. Because they say things that are really just so dumb and outrageous, and you're like, they get paid so much. And then you think about the men in your life that come to you and say this amount of stupid things, but very confidently, and you're like, oh wow, they grew up listening to these radio football narrators, and of course they think that that is the way. At least that is what happens in Latin America. I don't like the term empowerment because it implies first that you are disempowered, and that it's something that you can do, and suddenly publicity tells us that being empowered is buying soap, or going to the salon, or having a new dress, or spending money, and of course that is not empowerment. Why do women prefer jobs with flexible hours? Why do women prefer to work at home? Those are questions that we have to ask, not thinking that they just choose this, but that this is what they get. Because most women have the responsibility of being caretakers. And if you are a caretaker, you have to have flexible time. If you're going to get dismissed from your job, if you have to drop in the middle of the day to go to a school to tend to your child because something happened, you are going to be seen as a liability to your boss. And for example, the maternity leave is something that a lot of countries think it's progressive to make it longer, but they don't give paternity leave to men. So we become, women that are on our reproductive years, if that is something, we become a liability for companies instead of sharing the same amount of leaves, so that both men and women would have the mandate to do housework, because we are doing a double shift, and we will not thrive, and we will not advance in any of our works if we are sleep deprived all of the time, thinking about so many things that take up RAM of our brain, and that we could be using it to work, but we are using it to think on whether or not we should shave our legs, do we have to pick the kids from school, how much money are we going to spend in groceries, how are we going to eat, how the family is going to eat during the whole week so that it is nutritional and safe, and all of these things. So until men step up and do the work that we have been doing for a long time, and until they realize that, I think we're going to be stuck in the same place, because the moment women become mothers, it doesn't matter how much they're thriving in their work and how smart they are or how capable they are. The moment they become mothers, the gender wage gap begins to form. So I think that caretaking it's key. In Latin America, we're doing something. 8th of March is the International Day of Women's Work. So what we are trying to push for the last 2 years is a strike on the 8th of March, in which women don't do anything. But don't do anything means not doing breakfast, not taking the kids from school, not buying anything, because we are the biggest buyers in the economy. Not doing really anything. Not just having a free day, but having your co-workers, your male co-workers, do the job that you were supposed to do that day because you are on a strike, and telling powerful women that have positions of power to give the opportunity to strike to the women that work under them, so that we finally someday understand how much valuable and vital and urgent is all of the care work that women around the world do. And until this is valued and paid and recognized, and until this is done also by men in equal measure, I think we're going to be stuck with the glass ceiling that we have right now.
Thank you, Catalina. So if you're interested in to know how to engage with the strike, please see her after the panel.
Yes.
Regina, would you allow me to just permit another question so that we can, okay, perfect.
Thank you. I'm Gogetso, I'm management consulting with A.T. Kearney, global firm out of the US. You know, Max's question is quite interesting because I see this quite a lot in the consulting environment where if you don't speak over someone, it is assumed that you're not confident, but women just have a different method of working. So the question to you, Rajeev and Madhulika, is how does the gig economy then evolve in terms of values and what they value to allow women to become more successful in their traditional models of how they lead, as you put it?
You want to go first?
Right, I'm gonna get started. I think it was a very important point that you made about what actually has to change in the world so that women become, you know, more confident and have more self-esteem. And the problem with that is obviously that basically the whole world would have to change because we are taught, you know, from the beginning of our lives to, you know, sit straight and not, you know, raise too many questions and so on and so forth. And so it has to start with basic education, and it has to start with our fathers giving us the right tools to succeed. Fortunately, our mothers have already started the whole revolution of feminism a couple decades ago. And this is why we're now here and can have full-time jobs and actually can have a career. So thank you for that. But at the same time, we still totally see that, for example, when applying for a job, which you actually have to do all the time in the gig economy, women only apply for jobs, the majority of women only apply for jobs if they know that they don't only deliver 100% of the prerequisites, but 120, 140. And men even go ahead at like 75%. And of course they're going to get the job if they apply, you know, to a much larger number of jobs.
They even apply to jobs that are only targeted for women, and you will get men applying to that job also.
Always.
Yes. Exactly. So as I said, the problem is the status quo is there. And so it has to actually change, you know, from the beginning, the first day of a woman's life. You mentioned, you know, how women are still required to do most of the housework at home, and of course we also see that there's no paternity leave, or very little paternity leave is actually taken by men. It's a huge problem. So the gig economy actually brings an opportunity for women who are on maternity leave, would like to, you know, have a flexible job. Don't necessarily need that kind of security at that stage of their lives, or just want to get back to working. So that is definitely a huge opportunity. But at the same time, the problem with the gig economy is manifold. As I said, you have to apply every single time, and women are also really bad at. They would be really good at, but they have never been taught to negotiate good salaries, and so they by default go for lower salaries than men do. It's also linked to confidence. That means that we are reproducing the gender pay gap in the gig economy, and so on and so forth. So a lot to that.
Thank you, Regina. I mean, with that, somebody told me of a trick. I was told that if you want to negotiate a higher paying job on in the digital economy, what you have to do is take on an allies. So get somebody else in on the conversation and just call them your negotiator, but it's actually you in the back end. Mm-hmm. And this person can actually negotiate a higher payment for a job, which I found very fascinating. And I was told that if this person that you're pretending to be is a male, that you can actually multiply what you ask for. There's some driving. I'll get to you right now. There's a particular question that I'd like us to kind of touch on, if you'd allow me, Rajeev. Right, you being in a position where you study leadership, right? One of our driving questions was really focused on women-led organizations, right? So given this whole revolution on women, you don't like the term empowerment but for lack of a better word, women empowerment in the gig economy, are women-led organizations offering a different business proposition that is more sensitive to consumers' needs and a better social protection for their employees. As we're looking at women leaders in the workspace, in the gig economy, or is the status quo simply repeating itself?
Look, I mean, again, from a leadership perspective, right, I find women make better leaders than men, for the most part. That doesn't mean there are not enough terrible women leaders in the world. There are. But generally speaking, women make better leaders than men if they want to. I'll tell you why. One of the main differences, there are many reasons for that, why I say that, but one of the main ones I say that is because women have a better capacity than men to do two things at the same time. And leadership requires that you do two things at the same time. You need to be tough and you need to give love at the same time to be a good leader. Men can either give love or they can be tough. They can't do both together. Women, by nature of who they are, can do both things so beautifully together, and that, being the bedrock of a great leadership, makes them better leaders, but they must want to be better leaders. Okay, so that's the key. Secondly, about you use the word empowerment again, and I feel it is disrespectful to women when somebody asks the question, how can we empower women? So on that point, I agree with you 100%. It's disrespectful to women to even ask that question. Let's get one thing clear. Nobody can empower anybody.
Exactly.
You cannot empower a woman. You cannot empower a man. There is only one kind of empowerment, and that is self-empowerment. And that self-empowerment will only come if you are 100% true to yourself about your values, and if you give yourself a values-based purpose. Because if your purpose is based on your values, you've lost fear. And if you are not afraid anymore, you can do anything in the world, let there be 1,000 challenges. So the only empowerment possible is self-empowerment. Let's get ourselves that.
Wow, there we go.
Since we are veering away from gender and gig economy, I just thought I can point out here, since someone did ask about how to empower women employees, I would gladly admit that I was volunteered by Samir for that very reason for this panel. So I think to answer the question, since it's a peer-to-peer network, as Regina mentioned, we shouldn't be just looking at the job seekers, but we should also be looking at the employers. So how can employers try, and this is something that goes to one of the driving questions as well, is there a way to maybe anonymize identity online? That's possible for not the in-person work, so if it's, if it's driving cars or if it's doing any household chores, so you still need someone to turn up at your doorstep. But otherwise, is there a way to anonymize both the job seeker and the employer as well, since, the gender of the employer has a lot to do with the negotiation and the salaries. So if there's something we can think about as well.
All right.
Hello everyone, my name is Rahul Tiwari. I am a final year student of Delhi University. My question is to Madhulika and Rajeev sir, that as you know, in Indian parliament, hardly women are being representative. Hardly women representatives are there. And if you see the condition of the Indian Supreme Court, right now, fortunately, we have 3 female judges out of 25 judges. So I just want to know one thing, that I'm not asking what men should do. I just want to know what women should do so that they can get proper representation and social equity. Thank you.
You want me to go?
I think, could I ask for one of you to answer that question?
Would you like to, or would you like me to? I'm happy to if you want.
I think, we are limiting the conversation to what men can do or what women can do, and which is all well and good, but I think we can move to maybe a more productive way of thinking about it in terms of what can policymakers do. So again, I'm bringing it back to the gig economy here. How can you make sure that there's social security that's ensured when you have an online enabled, peer-to-peer network that's helping with these jobs here. And I just generally do not, I think one way of looking at it is how do you ensure regular pay, how do you ensure safety for in-person work. So I think that's probably what I'm thinking about right now. So I don't necessarily have an answer to that question. So
Women representation in spaces of power, basically. Let me go.
I think we skipped over the question that you asked. Lady.
Yes.
You want to go back to her?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm Lintang. I'm from Indonesia. Currently, I am working as a researcher in a human rights organization in Indonesia. Now, actually, my question is already mentioned in Madhulika, but I wanna talk about when we're talking about the gender. So maybe we we also talking about the affirmative action. Is do we have or are we should we have the affirmative actions in terms of this technology and gender equality, and also, or what kind of the affirmative actions in terms of technology environment should be? Is it the regulation or policy, or the system of the technology itself? Thank you.
And would you like to answer that, Rajeev?
So, I like to call the current times the open source era, or sometimes I refer to it as the naked era. Why? Because there's no privacy. Every action, every word, everything that anybody does is out in the open, and leaders particularly are naked. So why that relates to your question is this. The beauty of today's times, if there is one silver lining about the lack of privacy, is that it might just make society a little bit more honest and a little bit more fair. Look at what happened at Uber. When the news about how they were treating women came out, it cost the CEO his job, right? Look at what's happening. Look at what happened at so many other examples that where the moment you do something wrong, it's out there in the open. So I think companies and organizations that don't take the issue of treating women the way they should be treated by giving them equal opportunity, etc., the market will punish them because we live in the naked era. There is a self-built-in audit mechanism for leadership, for governance in there, that in the past you could hide bad behavior. You cannot anymore. People will not buy your product if you don't stand for the right values as a company. So I think the idea of affirmative action, it's going to take care of itself for the most part. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have the right policies. We should. But we have momentum behind us because of the times we live in as well. So I'm very optimistic.
I just wanted to say something about that, just like a little tweak on it. Because yes, I think that's a very positive view, and I want to believe that it is like that. But if that was really true in every context, we wouldn't have Trump. Yeah. So I think that is something that we have to aim to reach, because sometimes, for example, I feel that women, when they get into power positions, they are very hardly bullied by misogyny. Misogyny is the enforcing policy of sexism. And every time a woman moves out of the tight spot that our gender roles have assigned us, misogyny will come to get you. And that's, for example, what happened to Hillary Clinton. That's what happened with a lot of women leaders that go out there. And so, yes, I do think that we are the ones that have to empower ourselves. But women that get to leadership positions are having a double fight with misogyny and with everything around them that's trying to hold them back and telling them there are ball busters or harpies or nasty women or whores or you name it. That's what happens when women come into public space. Yeah. So I actually understand if some women are fed up and they don't want to be leaders because they are already dealing with harassment every day. They go out trying not to get raped, and they just want to end their day and go to sleep and then wake again and do the children and do this and do that. Well, they are fighting a very hard misogyny. In the moment you declare yourself as a public feminist, the moment you show your ambition to men and to people, you will be regarded as a harpy, and then misogyny will come, and that is very hard. And I think it needs a lot of leadership, empowerment, and a lot of education on how to be a leader to counter it. But I also want to say that it is very hard for women. Like usually in the first semesters of any university class, teachers tell you something like, this is hard, only the most fittest will survive, this is going to be so... When men hear this, they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to compete, and I'm going to be the best. Many women, when they hear this, go like, oh my God, not something else. Now I have to come into class and fight and also try not to get raped by my teacher? Come on. So I can understand when women don't have this drive because it is very hard for most of them, and you need a lot of privilege, and you need education.
And
you
may
need
I suggest
leadership.
that could be where the leadership energy now
Yes,
comes
exactly.
in. So because time is not on our side, maybe let's just take all the questions together, and then if you could kind of direct the question to one particular panelist, and panelists, if you could take about half a minute, what have you, to answer the question, that would be great. I think we'll go from this side of the room to here and finish with you, ma'am. All right. Let's go.
Hi, thank you. I'm Rajeev Rajagopalan. I am with the Observer Research Foundation. I'm a distinguished fellow, and I head the Nuclear and Space Policy Initiative. Gender pay gap, equal pay, equal opportunities, these are concepts that we have been talking about. But how has technology managed to remove some of the barriers? Women in engineering and generally STEM education have been pretty large numbers, but has technology made a difference? Has some of these issues been tackled? Second, a 30-second comment to Rajeev, because he said, women make better leaders because they can do two things at the same time, but they have to be determined to be better leaders. I do not care if women make better leaders. I think my argument is that women form the 50% of the population. They ought to have a voice, they ought to have a role, they ought to have that influence leadership role. It doesn't matter whether they are better leaders or not. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Hello, my name is Sanjay Anandram. We've talked about policy measures to ensure that gender gaps are neutralized. The country that's done the most in this regard is probably Sweden, and which has invested very heavily in bringing about the right kinds of policies. Yet, studies have shown that the gender gap in Sweden continues. And there are a variety of reasons. And if you were to take a set of abstractions of what those reasons are, they all kind of converge around some of the qualitative aspects that we just talked of. Namely, women are too nice. They're not as aggressive as males. They don't like highly competitive and charged environments. They don't like to negotiate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, these are some of the realities. And while men and women need to be treated with equal respect and provided with the equal opportunity, we must also recognize that men and women are different, right? And that's a very, very important thing to keep in mind. So biologically, men and women react differently to given situations. The nurturing instinct, for example, in a mother is dramatically different than that in a male. So the point I'm trying to make, therefore, is that while policy is great, and I'm all for it, I think the greater issue relates to how do you train, encourage women to demand what is theirs. And therefore, how do you negotiate, how do you encounter charged competitive situations?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm Liliana. I'm from Macedonia. I'm one of the 60% female that ORF was supporting to come here, and thank you. I was triggered by the title, The App as the Boss, and I was thinking in a way of the algorithm as the boss, which compromises with the female and male characteristics. So my question would be, do we need to implement some female characteristics when developing apps, or to implement within the algorithms in order to have specific, concrete, and let's say very decisive decision-making processes? As we heard previously, if we insert doubtful data, then we might get a decision that is not very correct. So what are the ways towards introducing female characteristics into algorithms in order to have correct decision-making processes? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Lata Reddy. I'm a fellow at the ORF and also the co-chair of the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. I just wanted to make some comments, not really questions, but I think it's related to what you've been talking about. Firstly, the question of anonymity, that whether applications for jobs, whether in the gig economy or other jobs, if they're made anonymous gender-wise, would it solve the problem? My own feeling is yes, because if you look at why women have been able to come up, I was myself a foreign service officer. I wrote an exam, and I was only identified by a number, not by gender, not by name, not by my face. Therefore, I was scored on a very equal basis. And the interview, yes, there a gender bias could come in. But since that's not the major event, I mean, that's not the major component, I think anonymity and insisting that job applications should not be determined on gender, at least the major qualifications, etc., would lead to equality. Secondly, you talked about parliament. Why in parliament have we been so slow, and why are the number of women parliamentarians so low? The answer is simple, because that's not an anonymous process. It's a public process.
Yes.
The party knows they're choosing a woman. The voter knows they're choosing a woman. And essentially, whether because of the factors that you brought out or otherwise, everybody knows the candidate is a woman. So until the parties themselves change, until the political system changes, without affirmative action, the number of women, at least in the Indian parliament, is not going to go up. So, which is why I feel we should have the reservation as far as parliament is concerned, because voting cannot be voting for a candidate cannot be an anonymous procedure. Finally, I just want to say that if you don't have a supportive ecosystem, it's very difficult to develop the leadership qualities you're talking about, sir, because I had a very supportive ecosystem. I had a liberal education. I came from a privileged background. I had a very supportive family, including my father, my grandfather. I was the first woman in my family to work. But without that ecosystem, I wouldn't have the confidence to do what I did and to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma. Samir is about to kick me out, so very quick, may I ask?
Very, very quick.
One minute, Catalina.
Men and women are not different in nature. We are not nicer, we are not more nurturers, we are not caregivers because we want to. No, this is not about love and this is not about biology. We are the same as men. The things that make us equal are way more than what make us separate. The fact that I have an uterus, and this is something that you don't know because you don't know if I had an hysterectomy, does not make me nicer or a caregiver or a good person or more insecure or less assertive to ask for a job. It's education and gender education, sexism, and all of the cultural barriers that we have to face, including harassment, what makes us this way. It is not, women are not naturally nothing. We are not different, we are equal. And what is more important is that we are equal people, so we should have equal opportunities and equal rights.
Thank you, Catalina. Regina, very fast on the female characters in algorithms, 30 seconds. Rajeev, if you could talk about training and encouraging women to demand what's theirs, 30 seconds, close. Madhulika, then you can close, and then I will be out of your shoes. Samir, I'm not even looking at you. Let's go.
Yeah, I can even keep it to 10 seconds because the answer is there's absolutely ways, and the easiest way to do that, to avoid algorithmic bias, is to have more diverse team actually create those algorithms. That's easy. It's so easy. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Diverse teams, Rajeev.
On training?
Yes.
So I think we should stop investing $80 billion on teaching people things like emotional intelligence, communication skills, and influencing skills, and instead spend it on encouraging people to find out who they really are in terms of their values and their values-based purpose. That's the best gift you can give to people if you want to really develop them so that they can find their own self-empowerment.
Okay, thank you. Madhulika, opportunities in the digital space, has it given a different framework for women to work with right now?
Since we mentioned anonymity for job seekers, I just want to stress that we're also looking for anonymity for employers as well. That's a two-way street. Yeah.
Thank you. So to just end our conversation today, I would just like to point out that we have a unique opportunity to create an inclusive world through the eyes of empathy, responsibility, and sheer vision. The internet does not see gender, only if we let it. So a round of applause to an outstanding panel.